Hi boys and girls, I'm back with our read aloud book. Today we're going to be reading chapter 5. Chapter 5 is called Roller Skates. If you remember from yesterday, chapter 4 ended, Matt was thinking about leaving Samantha's house at Craven Manor. Chapter 5. As if she had read his thoughts, Sam sat bolt upright. You're not going. I'm sorry I shouted at you. Really, I am. Look, I know something good that we can do after lunch. Oh, please don't go. Matt hesitated. Well, anyway, I promised to find you some dry clothes. Come on, let's go up to my room and you can try on a pair of my jeans. I really should go. Matt protested as he found himself being half urged, half pushed across the hall and up the staircase. And I've got a sweatshirt that you can have, my favorite, and it's from the Olympic Games. The jeans and shirt fit well. He was grateful for them. It wasn't until he had peeled off his own clothes that he realized just how damp and uncomfortable they had been. You can have a bath if you'd like, said Sam. Thanks. Not just now. Lunch was one thing, but somehow Sam felt taking a bath in a strange house whose owners he had not yet met was going too far. He gazed at the soft white carpet and filmy white curtains, the fitted cupboards and crowded bookshelves. It was very different from the home. What's your room like? Asked Sam. All right, I share it with 2 other boys. She wrinkled her nose. I'd hate to share. Yes, I bet you would, thought Matt. His eye was caught by a pair of framed photographs on a small table beside the window. Is that your mom and dad? She came and stood beside him. Yes, she said, and together they looked down at the 2 faces. Mrs. Cooper was a little like Samantha. The same narrow pointed face and the same springy halo of curls, but tidier. Mr. Cooper had a mustache, the old-fashioned sort that swept up at the ends. His hair was graying and he had a scar on one cheek, running from the corner of his mouth to his ear. That happened in Brazil, said Sam. Her finger traced the scar across the glass. Some of the wildlife got a bit too wild. What was he doing in Brazil? Searching for new specimens, plants. Daddy's a botanist. He's quite famous, actually. She gazed at the photographs a moment longer. Come on, let's go. Back in the hall, Sam produced 2 pairs of roller skates from a cupboard. Put these on, she ordered, handing him a pair. They were good skates, he saw, with large wheels, crowded with ball bearings and shiny chrome adjusters. As they sat on the hall stairs to fasten them, he pinched himself. Was he really awake? Were there really people who skated in their own hallways? Not in the world he lived in, there weren't. He stood up, expecting at any moment to see angry adults rushing out of passages or sweeping down the staircase. But Sam confidently launched herself out of the center of the floor with a loud whoop of pleasure and a rumbling roar of wheels that brought no response whatsoever from the empty, silent rooms around them. Watch me, she shouted. Catching hold of a pillar, she swung around it, round and round, gaining speed until she was whirling in a dizzy blur. Then she let go and, under Matt's astonished gaze, flew off at a mad tangent towards the opposite wall, where a life-size Regency gentleman in lime green satin stared from his gilt frame in disapproval. Matt closed his eyes as the great portrait rocked violently and crashed to the floor. He was not surprised to see Irene appear at the door, but he was surprised when she turned back without a word and shut the door behind her. It was hard to believe that no one cared. Sam certainly showed no concern. She circled the hall a couple more times, then advanced on to Matt. Well, come on then. Grabbing his hand, she began to tow across the floor, and after one anxious backward glance, he forgot everything except the pleasure of skating. Faster and faster they flew, forwards and backwards, side by side and in tandem, weaving between the stone pillars that supported the open gallery above. Matt felt wonderful. The rumble of the wheels filled his ears and the hollow echo of their shrieks, and even the damage they did, the new raw splinters in the oak floor, the vase that lay in pieces beside the stone fireplace, just added to his exhilaration. He shouldn't be skating here, but oh, it was fun. Later came the guilt. As they flung themselves onto the green brocade sofa that faced the front door, Matt was dismayed at the havoc they had wreaked. Don't worry about it, said Sam with an airy wave of her hand. Irene will sort it out. Matt bent to unstrap the skates. Look, I'd better get going. I want to find somewhere to stay before it gets dark. Sam's mood changed instantly. No, you can't go. Stay with me, please. No, I really think we can have so much fun, she said desperately. You must stay. But why? Because I need a friend. Okay, but you must have some proper friends. Why pick on me? We don't even know each other. I was at boarding school. All my friends are there. I don't really have any friends around here. Matt shook his head. He was beginning to feel trapped. She gazed at him pleadingly. Just stay till tomorrow. If you do, I'll lend you the money to go wherever you want. In fact, I'll give it to you now. I've got nearly $100 saved up, enough to last you quite a while. Is that a promise? I promise. All right, he said reluctantly. I suppose I could stay until morning. Sam's mood changed again. She sprang to her feet and clapped her hands. Brilliant! Now, what size shoes do you take? 6. Good, that's my size. You can wear my old boots. We're going riding. Riding? No thanks. I had enough riding this morning. But I'll lend you Bess. She's nice and gentle, not like Lucifer. You'll enjoy it. Really, you will. Matt wasn't so sure. He had never ridden before, and his introduction that morning on the back of Lucifer had been like learning to swim by being thrown off a ferry boat into the sea. You should be good, Sam flattered. You've got the right build, and your hands look right, too. Matt extended his hands. They looked perfectly ordinary to him. Square, slightly tanned, and slightly grubby, 4 of the fingernails bitten down. You're not really scared of horses, are you? Sam challenged him. Of course not. Was he? No, only of falling off, but maybe riding a whole horse and not just the slippery back end of someone else's would be okay. Anyway, he was not going to be shamed by a girl, even one as weird as Sam. All right, what are we waiting for? Yeeks! Sam leaped up. Come on, let's go then. Let's get those boots on. Oh, and some clean socks. You're not wearing those smelly things inside of my boots. Chapter 6 is called Matt Meets Mr. Higgins. We'll read Chapter 6 too today. 5 minutes later, they emerged into the corridor, but someone was about. As they turned onto the main landing, Sam sighed. It's Mr. Higgins, she said in a disgusted whisper. He's always snooping around. Mr. Higgins didn't look like a Mr. Higgins. There was something un-English about the slanting cheekbones and the way he pursed his full mouth red against the pale indoor olive of his skin. His dark eyes glittered as they rested on Matt, and one well-manicured finger tapped lightly on the balustrade. But he wore the sort of English uniform Matt imagined a butler in a stately home might wear. Black jacket, black and white trousers, a snowy white shirt, and a striped tie. Who is this? He asked Sam. He's my friend. He's staying with me. And your parents? They know? Sam snorted. Come on, Matt, we're wasting our time. Wait! Mr. Higgins' harsh command was a bullet in Matt's back, and despite Sam's urging, he stopped. Who are you, boy? His name's Matthew Jackson, said Sam swiftly. And he's a friend from school. It was all arranged ages ago, and his parents dropped him off for a week on the way to their airport. They're going to Madeira for a week. Matt had to admire her. He wished he could lie just like that. They did not come into the house, half question, half statement. I was out riding. I met them outside at the gates, and they were already late, so they left him with me and dashed off. That's a pity, said Mr. Higgins, because I do not think your parents will wish to entertain your friend at this time. You know they are extremely busy with their work. That is a pity, said Mr. Higgins. Well, we can't send him back, said Sam. There's nobody to look after him. Even their housekeeper has gone off to stay with her sister, and there'd be an awful row if they came back and he wasn't here. Her eyes locked with Mr. Higgins, and she spaced out her words. They're very old friends of my parents. They know them very well. And Mr. Jackson is a very important man. He has lots of contacts in the government, the police. Mr. Higgins was silent, but 2 more long white fingers joined the first to drum a tattoo on the balustrade. It was the only sound in the room, and Matt found himself putting pictures to its rhythms. A train hurtling down a track faster and faster, a horse galloping downhill. Sam dug him with a sharp elbow. Let's go. Look, the sun's shining and we're missing it. Matt risked a glance at Mr. Higgins, but the man was still staring at Sam. A week, you say? Very well. Mr. Higgins nodded, but there was no approval in his nod, and Matt had an uncomfortable feeling that the matter was not ended. Use your knees, instructed Sam, and hold the reins the other way. I feel like an idiot. You don't look like it. You look great, really. Now straighten your back. That's it. She laughed. I wish I had my camera here. I'd take a picture to show you. Really, you look like an absolute natural. That's all very well, but looking natural isn't going to help me when we move. I still feel as if I'm going to fall off. You'll be all right. Sam moved her horse closer to his. Now, do the same as me. She dug her heels into Lucifer's sides and with a click of her tongue and a light shake of the reins, moved forward. Matt imitated her actions. Bess, the dappled gray mare that Sam had produced for him, smiled placidly into space. She doesn't want to go. You have to show her you mean it. Matt tried again and again, and at last they moved across the stable courtyards towards the drive. He began to enjoy himself, letting his body sway lazily in the saddle. If he closed his eyes, he could almost imagine he was a cowboy on a Texas ranch or the Australian outback. He leaned forward and drew one hand down Bess's long gray neck, hot and slightly tacky against his palm. He inhaled her sweet horse smell and decided there was something in this riding business after all. Really, it was quite easy once you had the hang of it. The sky had cleared and the sun sparkled off grass still damp from the morning's rain. The smell of summer filled the air. Matt caught Sam's eye and they smiled at each other. Good, isn't it? She said. Great. He clicked his teeth and to demonstrate his mastery, dug his heels once or twice into Bess's sides. Bess ambled on. Sam's smile broadened into a grin. Race you to the gates, she shouted. No, hey, help! Lucifer leaped forward. Bess, casting placidity to the wind, followed hot on its tail. Somehow Matt managed to cling on as the two horses galloped down the drive, gravel skidding beneath their hooves, but almost before he had time to feel real panic, they reached the tall wooden gates. Sam pressed the button. Come on, she said impatiently when nothing happened. She pressed again. Would you believe it? She said at last. He's locked us in. He's fixed the gates so we can't get out. There followed another headlong gallop back to the yard where Sam flung Lucifer's reins at Matt with an order to unsaddle and stable him and stormed off into the house. What a pain, he muttered as he struggled with unfamiliar buckles and avoided Lucifer's questing teeth. Really, who did she think she was? Just as he was getting the hang of it, too. What did it matter if the gates wouldn't open? It wasn't the end of the world. They could have ridden around the garden. Heaven knows there was enough of it. After he'd settled the horses, he followed her voice, shrill with anger, across a terrace, bright with geraniums, to an open French window. There he hesitated. The prospect of another encounter with Mr. Higgins was not a pleasant one. He hid in the shadow of an overhanging tree and peered into the room. The room was large, furnished with chairs and sofas and bookcases and small tables crowded with ornaments. More paintings hung on the crimson walls, including one over the fireplace of Sam's father, younger and without the scar. Beneath the painting stood Mr. Higgins, his olive face inscrutable, but those telltale fingers of his beating out a slow drum on the marble mantel. His dark eyes followed Sam's furious pacing back and forth across the crowded room. Careless of anything that stood in her way, her waving arms swept a porcelain group of shepherdesses to the floor. Matt watched a tiny white head roll beneath one of the chairs. I have told you, Samantha, said Mr. Higgins. The gate mechanism is broken. Tomorrow it will be repaired. Sam halted before him. Her red gold hair stood on end and her eyes glittered. Oh, yes, and when tomorrow comes, it will be the next day and another excuse. I know what your game is. You think that now I've got someone on my side, you better keep us locked up so we can't cause any trouble. But you won't get away with it, you old toad. Mr. Higgins' fingers ceased their drumming. His eyes froze to black ice. It must make Mr. and Mrs. Cooper most unhappy to see and hear such rudeness in their daughter. I am sure that they have some suitable punishment in mind. His voice sharpened. Yes, Mr. Cooper? Mrs. Cooper? Matt craned forward until he could see the other two people in the room. They sat together on a small sofa at the right angle to the window, looking as unhappy as Mr. Higgins could have wished. But there was no mistaking their identity. Mrs. Cooper's red gold hair was as bright as Sam's own. Mr. Cooper's scar twitched as his eyes moved with strained attention between his daughter and Mr. Higgins. Well, so much for Sam's kidnapping story. Mr. Cooper nodded. Mrs. Cooper nodded too. Yes, she said. I think some sort of punishment. Let me see now. Her voice trailed away into an uncomfortable silence. Perhaps confinement to her room, suggested Mr. Higgins. Might teach Samantha to think more carefully before she speaks. Don't you agree, Mr. Cooper? Yes, I think that would be best, Samantha, just for a while. And who's going to make me? Demanded Sam. You? You have to put down your glass first. Or dear Mom, do you think we could drag her attention away from that magazine for 5 minutes? She laughed. You two couldn't make me do anything. Look at you. You're pathetic. You're just dummies, sitting there letting him do what he likes. Matt's jaw dropped. That's enough, Samantha. Mr. Higgins' eyes blazed at her. Respect your parents. They love you, and they have no wish to upset you. He gave a half smile. But I have no such qualms, my dear. Of course, if you refuse the opportunity to contemplate your misbehavior, there are other options. Sam's defiance crumbled. But what about my friend? What's he going to do? That was the moment when Matt still had a choice. He could creep off, find a way out of this strange household, or he could stay and give Sam some support. Not that he approved of her behavior. He could understand her dislike of Mr. Higgins. She was right. He was a toad, but her parents seemed harmless. And then his moment of choice was gone. He must have made some noise, for they all turned towards him, and he found himself being ushered into the room. So this is our daughter's little school friend, said Mrs. Cooper, losing any sympathy he might have felt for her. Little? Martin, is it? Matt, Sam corrected him. You know who he is, the Jacksons, don't you remember? It was all arranged months ago. Matt gets prickly heat whenever he's in a hot climate, so they arranged to leave him here with us while they went to Madeira. Once again, Matt marveled at her inventiveness. Ah, Mr. Cooper nodded. The Jacksons. Wasn't it with Mr. Jackson in Tibet last year that you found the new species of orchid? Ah, yes, of course. Sam smiled and her eyes slid towards Matt. She changed the subject abruptly. Anyway, you can't lock me up when we have a visitor. It's not polite. Mr. Higgins turned his dark gaze on Matt. I'm afraid Samantha must take her punishment, but I would be happy to entertain you until she is free again. Unless, of course, as her friend, you'd prefer to share her period of contemplation. That could also be arranged. Matt hesitated. Being holed up with Sam in her present mood was not something he looked forward to, but the prospect of being entertained by Mr. Higgins sent a shiver through him. What he'd really like to do was to say goodbye and go on his way, but Sam's make-believe had made that impossible. I'll keep Sam company, he said. Did he imagine the sigh of relief that escaped Mrs. Cooper, or the murmur of approval from her husband? Certainly, the tension that had built up in the room began to lessen, escaping with an almost audible hiss, like air from a leaking balloon. Suddenly, they were all smiling, all except Sam. A friend in need is a friend indeed, quoted Mr. Higgins with solemn reverence. Matt looked away from his mocking gleam in his eyes. Oh, by the way, Mr. Higgins drew Matt's attention back to him, and Matt saw that he was holding at arm's length the damp and crumpled clothes that he had discarded upstairs. I assume these are yours? You've been in my room, said Sam. You've got no right. My dear, you left your door open, but these, he examined the dirty, mudded caked clothes with distaste. I am surprised that Mr. and Mrs. Jackson would deliver their son in such a dreadful state. He fell off my horse, said Sam quickly, into a puddle. He's not a very good rider, she added in explanation. Mr. Higgins raised a skeptical eyebrow. It was clear that he didn't believe Sam's story, and Matt waited, but he said no more. All right, that is the end of our 2 chapters for today. Those definitely were an interesting 2 chapters. Now that we've seen that Sam's parents are actually in Craven Manor, it seems like there's some sort of tension in that room between the parents and Mr. Higgins. And Sam did tell us that they were kidnapped. So interesting. Comment below and tell us what your thoughts are. Do you think they were kidnapped by Mr. Higgins? What do you think the situation that's going on there really means? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Enjoy your day.